Question for you. How rough would things have to be before you let your doctor cover part of your body in something that would cause a painful stinging sensation anywhere it touched your skin? Doesn't sound fun, does it? Not to me anyway. But that is what a surgeon's assistant prescribed in 1821. His name was John Piper, and his patient was a young woman who had been dealing with total paralysis of her right arm for 5 months. She couldn't move it and had no sensation at all. She had already been to about a half a dozen doctors looking for a cure, and all of the treatments current at the time had been tried. Now back then, that included things like bleeding with leeches. So, maybe the remedy John suggested wasn't so bad after all. What he proposed was a method known as urtification, or in plain English, flogging with stinging nettle. You're listening to Plant Connection. Life today can feel overwhelming, like we've drifted away from its natural rhythm. This podcast is your space to slow down, breathe, and rediscover the peace and clarity that come from reconnecting with the natural world. I'm your host, Lisa Cutshaw. Let's reconnect, one plant at a time. Let's start by saying that John Piper, the doctor in this situation, acknowledged that other medical professionals at the time thought that the urtification was a ridiculous suggestion. So if you're wondering what he was thinking, well, his colleagues were too. But the thing is, there was historical precedent for this. Pliny the Elder had considered nettle an effective remedy against muscle paralysis, and this was 1700 years earlier, so this wasn't a new idea. So yeah, this poor woman's arm was wasting away. The flesh was cold to the touch, and the tendons were contracted. It's probably fair to say she may not have expected much when John suggested beating her arm with nettles, but clearly she was game. So John used a bundle of stinging nettles to administer what he called piquant flagellation in repeated doses throughout the day. The good news is, after each of those periods of flagellation, the patient experienced more and more sensation in her paralyzed arm. By the end of the day, she had regained the use of her arm, and the only remaining symptom was what John Piper described as a slight weakness of the wrist. That wrist was wrapped with a plaster and bandage and reportedly healed completely. Modern physicians have speculated about why nettles would have such an effect, and the plausible options they have suggested include counter-irritation, skin stimulation, and placebo. Now, counter-irritation is anti-inflammatory, and the idea is that introducing another source of pain kind of breaks the circuit of the original pain, allowing the body to back off and let the inflammation calm down. In situations where the inflammation itself is causing issues, that can help the body recover. In reading about this, I was amazed that in a much less dramatic way, I may have benefited from a similar treatment to what that young woman experienced 200 years ago. In my case, it wasn't really paralysis, it was a condition known as frozen shoulder, and the treatment was acupuncture. Doctors aren't sure why the acupuncture works, but in this case too, they speculate that it's counter-irritation. And I have to say, whatever the mechanism is, I'm just grateful that it gave me back full range of motion and full strength in my arm. And I have to believe that the young woman in 1821 felt that way too. Now with nettle, you don't have to use flagellation to get benefits. The topical application of leaves has been used to treat arthritis, lower back pain, tendonitis, and sprains. In fact, Hippocrates, writing roughly 2,500 years ago, listed 61 medicinal uses for nettle. Now there was a legend in England that the Romans had introduced Roman nettle, or Urtica pilulifera, when they occupied England. The theory being that the Roman soldiers would rub themselves with the leaves to stay warm. Now there's no actual evidence that this happened, and there's a native nettle that thrives in England, so the soldiers wouldn't have needed to bring their own unless they just wanted to. In Italy, there was a belief that throwing nettle leaves on the fire during a thunderstorm would protect against lightning strikes. And in Germany, people would gather nettles before sunrise to keep evil spirits away from cattle. So this was something that had a lot of meaning for people across Europe. From a practical standpoint, nettle is very nutritious and has been used to treat anemia and other nutrient deficiencies. The leaves can be added to soup or made into a tea. They can stimulate the kidneys and strengthen the immune system, possibly by strengthening the mucosal lining of the respiratory system and the lining of the urinary tract. And the root of the plant is used to treat prostate issues. Back before people used paraffin, they used nettle oil. And dropping a little nettle juice into milk will curdle it, helping with the cheese-making process for Cheshire cheese. Nettle is one of those plants that is considered an excellent compost for the garden because it contributes so many nutrients to the soil. So, if it's so good for us in so many ways, why do a lot of people avoid it if they possibly can? Well, if you've never brushed up against it accidentally, consider yourself lucky. The sting comes from formic acid, the same thing that makes the bite of a red wood ant hurt. And it does hurt. The sting from common nettle can last all day. It's not something that goes away as soon as you pull your hand away from the plant. Supposedly, if you get into stinging nettle, you can take away the sting by rubbing your skin with dock leaves. Now, I haven't tried this myself, but it could be worth a shot if you need it. Now, as if we haven't listed enough ways nettle has helped people over the years, it also has fiber in its stem that can be spun, much like flax or hemp. In fact, nettle fabric has been used in Europe for thousands of years. For instance, in Denmark, nettle cloth burial shrouds have been found dating back more than 5,000 years. But it is not some ancient practice lost to time. During both World War I and World War II, Germany used nettle fabric when supplies of cotton became difficult to procure. As a food source, nettle has helped people make it through famine many times over the years. The Irish famine, Soviet famines, and World War II were all times when nettle was documented as a food source that helped people survive. In Native American lore, a Cree legend suggests that nettle developed its sting to remind us to respect the plant and not take its benefits for granted. Given all the benefits that we've listed right here, and there are probably many more, I would say that carries a lot of weight. In Celtic lore, dense stands of nettle were thought to protect fairy homes. And across cultures worldwide, there's a shared understanding that nettle is a complex plant. It heals at the same time it hurts. It protects and it punishes. And what better reminder that we cannot take without consequence, that we must approach nettle and nature itself with humility and gratitude. I usually talk a little bit about how to grow the plant in your own garden, so let's acknowledge up front, most people do not plant stinging nettle on purpose. I have, and I've done it in a dedicated herb garden, which could be wise. If you're going to plant it, you might want to keep it from setting seed, just so you don't have it growing everywhere. And if you have patches of nettle growing wild nearby, you probably don't need to plant it. You can harvest it wild. But if you do choose to plant some stinging nettle, seeds are available from catalogs that specialize in herbs. If you plan to use any part of the plant for food or tea or anything you'll ingest, it's best to buy seeds that have not had any chemical treatment applied. Now, in ecology, nettle is considered an edge species. It likes moist areas, often at the edge of a stream or a water body, and it can live in partial shade to full sun. So what does that mean, an edge species? To an ecologist, it means the plant lives at the border, the transition between two ecotones. So it could be between forest and grassland, something like that. But from a more symbolic viewpoint, because it's an edge species, it thrives in areas after a disturbance. So you'll often find it in places like roadsides or at the edge of a construction site. Symbolically, you could think of that dual nature of nettle as being sort of a threshold guardian. If you want the nourishment, healing, and wisdom that nettle offers, you must respect and endure the gauntlet required to get to it. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that's a healthy way to approach life in general. If we're going to take from nature, we must do so with respect and give back at least as much as we take. In a healthy relationship, both parties give and receive. They help each other. They show respect and they care. And dare I say, they maintain healthy boundaries, which is another thing nettle's sting could teach us. The more I think about nettle, the more it seems to be an excellent teacher, reminding us that relationships are two-way streets, and no one can get away with always taking more than their share, even when they're taking from nature, maybe especially then. It's something I talk about a lot, the absolute need to strengthen our relationship with nature as individuals and as a society. That's the whole reason I'm here talking to you now. So, Nettle, thanks for your wisdom, your nourishment, and your healing. And if you agree that strengthening your relationship with nature is crucial, please consider joining the Root Stem Leaf Substack. Let's work together to create the world we want to live in. See you outside. Thank you for joining me on this journey back to nature with Plant Connection. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to tap subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss the next episode. See you next time.